Creamy and very cedar forward, this cigar is outstanding. Today, I'm going to be taking y'all back, way back to the very beginning when I first started at Klaro Cigars. It was the spring of 2022, and the head honcho here at Klaro, Michael, had just asked me to start writing reviews about cigars. While I had only been on for a couple of months, my experience had been pretty much limited to writing about humidors and tobacco culture and history and all the nerdy deep dive stuff that you've come to expect from us here at Klaro. Needless to say, I was both excited and a little bit nervous about this new task of mine, as I had never reviewed a cigar before, at least officially, but I was determined to make it happen. And so I started looking at my humidor and started thinking about, well, what do we sell at Klaro that's in my humidor that I could promote? Which leads us to this little cream-colored tube sitting in front of me right now. This is the AVO Classic No. 2 by Davidoff Cigars, an old school blend that has been around for quite a while now and is readily available on pretty much any store shelf you can imagine. The No. 2 is their big seller in this line of classic smokes, and it is always available in tubos if you want it, which I actually do prefer. Not only do the tubos keep the cigar protected and ready for travel at any given moment, but they also contain a little bit of a cedar spill tucked inside, or if you are in the mood to light up the cigar with something other than a torch lighter or matches. But it wasn't the handy little aluminum tubos or the cedar tucked inside that cajoled me into making the AVO Classic No. 2 my first ever cigar review. It was the fact that the wrapper on this cigar is a Connecticut sun-grown varietal out of Ecuador that first caught my attention, followed by the fact that a good bit of the long filler inside is supposedly at least 25 years old, and that is according to sources like Half Wheel, for instance. So with this information in mind, I proceeded to do my review, and it absolutely bombed. Nobody clicked on it, nobody read it. Cigars? I don't think we sold a single one. And it was all because, well, there wasn't a video associated with it. It was just a little written blog with my personal takes on the cigar and just a handful of photos. So now here we are, a full 3 years plus later, and you get to look at my fat gregarious ass pretty much every week. Yay for you, right? And here we are, the AVO Classic No. 2, and my fat gregarious ass salivating once again over what I know is going to be one hell of an awesome smoking session. Let's talk a little bit about this wrapper and smell the foot, eh? Unscrew the cap on your AVO's tubos and remove the cigar, along with its cedar strip inside, if you feel so inclined. It still smells fantastic. And you will be greeted not just by cedar aromas, but by the smell of a clearly sun-grown Connecticut wrapper. Faintly sweet and definitely full of cedar, this leathery aromatic that follows behind on the wrapper is something that is mixed with a little bit of Nesquik milk cocoa powder that's sweet but also a little bit generic in a way. And I do note that the aromatics on the wrapper aid in making the foot even more interesting once you get down to smelling it. But before I get to discussing the aromatics on the foot, let me tell you that there are two other aromatics that I pick up on the wrapper. One of those is quite commonplace, and that is the smell of roasted or toasted walnuts. The second isn't as commonplace, and maybe it's just me and a memory trigger of some sort, but it reminds me of clothes hanging on the line, drying in the sun, or which have already dried in the sun and are pulled off and sitting in a basket somewhere. It's that bright sunshine smell on cotton, and it's wonderful aromatic. But maybe that's just the nostalgia associated with this cigar. I don't know. Let's talk about the foot for a moment, eh? Apples. Caramel-covered apples are the first thing that come to mind, followed by something also apple-related, and that is spiced cider. May it be hot or cold, The foot really does smell a lot like spiced cider, and it's delicious and juicy and fairly sweet as well as spicy. I'm also picking up on some salinity, and mixed salted nuts come to mind, along with the aromatic of freshly planed cypress. Not so much cedar, but cypress. If you smell the two side by side, you'll know the difference, and this definitely is a cypress aromatic. Now, as for the color and feel of the wrapper, well, it's rosado-ish, reddish color, not shade grown whatsoever from what I can tell, true to style or marketing, shall we say. And I find that it's oily, sticky in hand, and a bit on the veiny end as well, even though it is very well constructed. Remember, this is a Davidoff product, so expect the primo when it comes to construction. But enough about construction and aromas. Let's get some unlit impressions when it comes to flavor now. Quick cut of the cap. Oh my, aren't we on the dry side? Not in an unpleasant way or overly dried sense, it's been properly humidified, but dried wood comes to mind. Unlit impressions, at least from a cold pull perspective, are a mixed bag of almost everything. I'm detecting on one side some more of that cypress, and it's whole planks of the stuff instead of cedar at this point, along with some sweet dried fruits. Maybe not dried apples, but some dark dried fruits of different varieties. A little on the generic side, shall we say. But it's also creamy. I'm getting some mascarpone in there, along with some nougat. So there's some sweetness and dessert-like flavors from the heavily fermented tobacco, which could potentially be at least 25 years old, in the long filler, that is. And I'm enjoying that all the way up until the salinity hits me, which goes beyond salted mixed nuts. It's almost like a brackish water, aromatic, but a flavor profile. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, brackish water. It's faint, intriguing. Let's hope that isn't the case though when this cigar is set afar, so let's get to it, shall we? Now, I must say that for as tempting as it is to utilize the cedar that is sleeved inside of this tubos to light your cigar like a cedar spill, I have learned that over the years, this stuff is entirely too wispy and it just creates more smoke and risk than anything else. So we'll hold off on that. I'll just use the old-fashioned Klaro Overland Pro torchlighter in my hand, and we'll leave a link to some cedar spills down below that we manufacture in-house, so that if you really do want to get something a little thicker gauge to light a cigar with, you can. I cannot believe it's been over 3 years since I've smoked one of these. Always liked them though. I think I've smoked at least half a dozen in my life, and every time I smoke an AVO Classic number 2, I go, oh, it's called a classic for a reason. Woo, cedary, creamy, and very cedar forward. The start to this cigar is outstanding. There's a faint potpourri flavor and aromatic to this cigar as well right now that goes really well with the cedar. And while it's not the full-blown bowl of grandma's potpourri she leaves in the toilet room, it does have that interesting kind of floral aromatic and the spices that come with it, which mixed with all the doughy breadiness of the smoke and the sweetness that comes with it, makes me think of a spiced apple cake or something like that. Flavor profiles on the cigar, as well as body and strength, aren't all the way mild either. They start off on a mild to medium and continue to grow, where now even at the start of the first third, it's already almost full-blown medium all around. Let's keep moving, shall we? For the majority of the first third, I've been indulging in the flavors of sweet caramel, toasted walnuts, and a creamy, milky, vanilla-like flavor, and a rich medium texture. There's also a mixture of cedar and cypress inside of this cigar for those woody top notes that we like a lot in stogies. And behind this, comes a little bit of spice, but more in that spiced apple bread-like taste I was mentioning earlier. And it's dried apples, not the juicy, fruity, fresh, crunchy kind, but dehydrated and thrown into a piece of bread. Unfortunately, this cigar is rolled a little too tight, so I'm having to work a little harder than I'd like to get smoke flowing, which it does do. It just takes 2 puffs instead of 1. And the ash earlier on fell off and dropped unexpectedly. So that's a little bit of a setback, but it's burning true now. Let's keep moving. While labeled as a mild to medium cigar, I find that the body of this smoke leans more into medium than mild. That is primarily because the smoke that you pull in and exhale out is very creamy and milky, so the texture of it is quite velvety. It's delicious. And while the draw is still not great, it is loosening up a little bit, and I'm getting more smoke as I go. And that leads to some excellent flavor profiles and a damn good retrohale. The retrohales are all cedar and mixed spices, some cinnamon, caramel, things like that. And it's toasty and roasty and nutty, and it's very good. The flavor profiles mirror this almost exactly, but add in a little bit of sweet vanilla, and there's some heavy whipping cream in there, and it's really good. I remember my initial review of this cigar years ago. I kept comparing it to Crème Brûlée, and I can see why, especially with that vanilla and cream mixing together with the caramel. Quite good. Now regarding the ash, well, let's just say I've had better construction on an AVO cigar in my day. So I'm gonna tap this leaning tower of funkiness off, and let's see how the cone looks. No, not bad. Let's keep moving into the final third. The final third of this blend hasn't been so much about transitions as it has been evolutionary steps, and the evolution of the flavor profiles that were earlier have turned into something a little bit more rich, robust, and slightly spicy. While the cigar flavor profiles are undeniably roasty and toasty and slightly spicy upon the tongue, the creaminess of the smoke itself and those vanilla bean-like flavor profiles have rounded everything out, and the cigar smoke is definitely a medium milk bomb. Again, think creme brulee, but with some baking spices mixed in with it. And that bready, doughy, cake-like flavor profile mixes nicely with these sweet creme brulee flavors and the caramelized sugars that are slightly burnt. Delish. However, it's time to deband, so let's see how old AVO does over here, which is super easy. Actually, the band was so lightly glued on that it was sliding about earlier, and that scuffed up the wrapper, which is quite unfortunate. But still burning fine. Let's keep moving into parting puffs. As parting puffs unfold, the cigar gets creamier and the draw becomes more fluid, finally. Milky and creamy with ultra clean retrohales. This is potentially the best part of the cigar in my opinion right now. And I like that there are still some of those floral potpourri-like aromatics here and there to keep things intriguing. Yes, there's a little bit of heat intensity, but you're getting right down to the nub of the cigar, so it's to be expected. But my goodness, is this a very nice, clean way to end the smoke? And that leads us to a final assessment. While definitely not as much of a creme brulee bomb as I remember from my initial review, this cigar does still provide a lot of those vanilla bean and caramelized sugar tastes that creme brulee is known for. The texture of the smoke is also very creamy and milky, so that does aid in this flavor profile being one of the most prominent parts of the cigar. However, this time around, I'm detecting quite a bit more of that potpourri floral spice and baking spices as well, including those notes of dried apple and the bread-like flavors that come with apple bread and dessert breads. The cedar and cypress were also top-notch. The flavor profiles that followed in the finish were on the shorter end, but still very good. And I love how clean this smoke is. There's nothing really about it that has an imperfection in any form, really. But despite not having any flavor imperfections, the burn of the cigar has been a little bit problematic. The drop dash in the first third was an issue. The overly tight draw for much of the cigar was a little disappointing. And I noticed that while the ash did hold true and I didn't have to do any touch-ups, it was leaning one direction or another for much of the time. The way in which that cap was sloppily placed on the end also did cause some problems once it was cut. It started to flare out a bit on me after 15 minutes or so, which really isn't something you would expect to find in a Davidoff product. I also would have liked to have seen more of that walnut flavor or generic mixed salted nut taste from earlier on transition into the second third and beyond, where it primarily was only encapsulated in the first third. But these are all small qualms yet again for a great cigar that can be approached at any time of the day by almost anyone and return a really enjoyable smoking experience. And that is why I will give this blend a 4.2 out of 5 stars. So thanks for joining me for my first ever cigar redux here at Klaro Cigars and for listening to me yammer on about the good old AVO Classic #2. We'll catch you guys in the next review. Thanks for joining me. Cheers.